All right, everyone, it's time to get serious and talk about something that's really important. It's something so important that it's actually the entire reason that I started Pep Organ in the first place, more than 5 years ago now. It's something that also is so overlooked that I believe that 99% of musicians don't understand it. It's a concept that speaks directly to the importance of music, tells you exactly what it's all about, and yet, funnily enough, most people actually don't understand it at all. What am I talking about? Well, stay tuned and you'll find out. My experience being a musician started out when I was very young. I was only 3 years old when I picked up the violin, and later on, just 2 years later, I started learning the piano. Over the years, I learned technique, I learned a whole range of repertoire. I actually learned through the Suzuki method, which was a way to teach me how to listen to music before learning how to read it, which is actually not what a lot of people do these days. Really useful because it helped develop my ear and my listening, which then actually led me to be able to start improvising and work out chords and harmonies and all sorts of different things just by sitting at the piano. As I got older, the pieces that I was learning were also getting more difficult, as you would expect, and so the technical difficulty that was required to play them became more and more, and it meant that sitting at the piano or the violin was a lot of time spent working on technical details, whether it was my dynamics, whether it was my fingerings, a lot of which needed to be worked out in advance, the memorization of the pieces as well at that time, and also with violin, vibrato, all the technical things about hand position, fingers, bowings, how to use the wrist, all these things that came together to produce the performances that would get me over the line to pass the next exam that I had to sit. And over time, it became increasingly obvious to me that I was not going to make it as a musician, actually, because I realized that to be a really top-of-your-game violinist or pianist required such technical prowess that I felt like I could never achieve that. Fortunately for me, funnily enough, the organ is actually what helped save me from that path, because for me, the organ somewhat came naturally. It was something that I was able to adopt without too much difficulty, though it did take me a few years to learn how to play coming from the piano. But it was my pathway to being the musician that I am today. And while I do think that with more practice and perhaps more maturity, I could have gotten up to that new standard of violin and piano playing, I just didn't really have it in me at that time and at that age to do those things. Now, with organ, I did pass my exams and I ended up getting into university, which was great. And I was learning, the very difficult pieces of music at that time, and pieces of music that even today I find challenging. I kind of hit what would be considered that kind of top level, university level playing around when I got into university, and was playing difficult repertoire for the next few years. And as I was going to the university, I also had an opportunity, and a really great one at that time, to actually hear other people play their instruments, not just the organ, but lots of different things. I would actually go and sit in violin workshops, piano workshops, not because I necessarily had to, but because it was something that was interesting, and I was on site with so many talented musicians. I really wanted to see how it was done. What was really interesting about the different workshops was actually that they were run in different ways. For instance, the piano workshops and the opera workshops were run essentially like recitals, and so everyone had to essentially dress up and do their very best performance on the day. On the other hand, some other departments, particularly I think woodwind and brass, were a lot more lax, and while they still had an expectation that you performed a work that was complete and well prepared, there was not that same expectation, and people could dress a little more casually. Going on to the other spectrum of that was actually the historical performance department, where you were allowed to bring a piece of music that you just started learning the week before to get some advice on how to play it. It was a lot more of an open dialogue situation there, where audience members could comment and ask questions of the performer and ask questions of not examiners, but rather teachers who were in the room. And that was really useful. It was really a great way to see that collaborative learning process, which historical performance is all about. So you can see sort of two systems that diverge from this. One system is where a collaborative approach, where there's a to and fro, there's a more casual environment where people are free to perform, not at their highest standard, but they can actually share with their friends and their peers their approach to a piece of music. And then on the other hand, you've got a very hyper-competitive format, the opera and piano world, where you have to present very polished performances, and you're going to be looked down upon for making mistakes. And there's obviously no room in that environment for anyone from the audience to comment or tell them maybe that they should play a certain section in a different speed or a different kind of dynamic approach. That was all off the cards. Essentially, you gave a performance and then you had a review later from your teacher. So, what did I learn from these two different approaches? Both have their merits, but they also have their flaws too. Now, the flaw with the historical performance department, as you might be able to guess, was that because it was so casual and the way that people could perform, there wasn't really an opportunity for these performers to ever play at their highest level. They weren't expected to, outside of perhaps the actual examinations themselves. They never had that expectation to perform at their highest. And that did show because they didn't have the same rigor that you see from other departments. On the other hand, if you're in the piano department and you're playing for these piano recitals, typically you have one teacher for your entire 4-year degree, and the only feedback you ever get on your playing comes from that one teacher plus maybe 1 or 2 examiners along the way. Your friends, your peers, never feel like they're qualified to actually talk about your playing style or how it might be different. And so the result is that in both systems, while the historical performance one did lend itself towards more creativity, it led to performances that were compromised, whereas in the piano world, the performances were so polished that there was no room for personal voice. And I found this was to be the case quite often. Now, I was very lucky to meet some people who thought outside the box in this realm, and one of them, whose name was Ben Adler, who you may have seen on my channel, helped me to understand that music has a very different purpose to being something that you just perfect and then you present, and is essentially you recreating the music of a composer. And this is the thing that I think that 99% of people just don't understand. And that is this one concept. And here is the simplest way to put it, which is that music is a form of communication. A communication between who? A communication requires 2 people, right? So the one party is the performer, and then the other is the listener. And that's essentially what music is all about. And when you realize that it's communication, if I'm going to be talking to you in this exact monotone voice the entire time, I'm not going to present myself very effectively. But if I use maybe some gestures, if I talk in a certain way and use inflection in my voice, I can communicate more directly with you, the audience. And the same thing is true of music. Music being a communication means that suddenly it doesn't matter if I stop for a moment just to get your attention. Even though if I'm reading a script, maybe the script didn't tell me to do that. But just like with music, if I want a little phrase to grab the audience's attention, then I might stop suddenly, even though the performer or the composer didn't tell me to do that, or my teacher didn't tell me to do that, and play it in a certain way. Likewise, I can use dynamics as tools towards, again, communication. And when we're talking about communication, music doesn't communicate meaning in the sense of language, right? But it does communicate meaning in the sense of emotion. And so all these things that we learn and all these things that we spend our entire lives learning music and practicing to do, the technique, the trills, the vibrato, the fingerings, of course, the posture, the wrist movements, all those things that you would learn for your instrument, they all serve a purpose. And the purpose is not to present what we might call polished performance. It is to communicate with the audience. And that's exactly what I do here on Pep Organ. It's all about communicating with the audience through music. This is why I actually don't really care what piece of music I'm playing. It can be something written 20 years ago. It could be a pop song. It could be a classical piece. It could be by Bach, who we all love. Or it could be, a completely obscure composer. The point is, the composer is not relevant. What's important is the script, which is what you're given, right? The notes on the page, occasionally with dynamic markings and other markings that tell you how to play parts of it. And then that is channeled into your performance, which is then a communication to the listener. And so really, for me, it doesn't matter if my piece is composed by myself or composed by my best friend or even by my greatest enemy? It doesn't matter, because really it's the piece that is being used to communicate something, right? Some kind of emotional effect, some kind of expressive content. Now, I want to talk about that because this is important to Pep Organ, because some people don't realize that I'm a very busy man. I work at the University of Sydney, playing the organ and the carillon. I also direct a choir at Chatswood on weekends, as well as being the City of Sydney Town Hall organist. And these jobs keep me on my toes, right? And there's a lot to do with them. But I still run Pep Organ. I actually haven't quit Pep Organ. I'm still running it along the side. And why do I run Pep Organ? Because this is really the best platform for me to share this idea with you all. The idea that no matter how many years you've been learning, no matter who your teacher is, no matter what you've been told by your teacher, you need to remember that when you're a musician and you're there on the spot, on the stage, or in the organ loft, your job is to communicate with an audience. And the audience is not an imaginary audience. The audience is not your teacher. The audience is not your examiner. Those people are basically irrelevant. At that moment and in that point of time, the audience is the people who you are actually playing to. And whether that's on a live stream, and maybe that's people watching you around the world, like I might do on Pep Organ, or whether that's people directly in a venue, like in a church or in a concert hall, who are listening and they're there for one night or for one day just to hear you play, then that's who your audience is, and that's who you need to make your music for. This idea is really fundamental to Pep Organ, and I have to keep repeating it because, as I say, most musicians just don't understand this. When I went to these performances at the Conservatorium, yes, of course they were really highly qualified musicians with extremely great technique, and they were playing some of the most difficult repertoire. But I found myself often leaving these recitals very bored. I mean, honestly, just because you hear someone play something flawlessly doesn't mean it's a compelling performance. To have something surprise you, to have something intrigue you, to have something move you is really what it's all about here. And so I just don't want to go to performances as much as I used to because I keep getting burnt out like this. I keep going to these recitals, including recitals that, maybe might be an orchestra. And I just come out feeling like I wasted my time. It's so hard to find musicians who play with a soul. And to play with a soul requires a certain mastery of your instrument, sure, but it really requires the ability to know what your purpose is, like what you're doing it for. So I don't do Pep Organ for money, as much as some people seem to think I was doing this YouTube channel for money, or to sell my compositions or some other weird thing. I don't do it for any of those reasons. I do it because this is my platform to talk about what really matters in music and what informs all my other jobs, my jobs playing the organ and the carillon and conducting my choir. It's that there is expression, that music really does make you feel things. And in the modern world where we're so obsessed about being perfect, being precise, being accurate, as we've been taught for the last 100 years, as we've been reinforced by listening to recordings that are flawless all the time, we keep forgetting this idea that, once again, you can actually go and play a piece of music for an audience and make tons of mistakes, as sometimes I actually do. And look, they actually still enjoy it. They tell me at the end they loved the performance, and they're being sincere. And I realize, wow, okay, so it wasn't actually getting this passage right at the exact moment every time that made them enjoy the performance. It was the communication, the idea that I was actually sharing something that mattered to me and to them as well. So I hope that all makes sense, and I hope that you understand now that I'm here to talk about something really important on Pep Organ, and I'm going to keep reiterating this idea probably forever, because realistically there are always people coming to the organ, which is such a mechanical instrument, and they forget that even though it's such a robotic type instrument, we actually, as humans, need to put ourselves into the instrument to produce the emotional effect that we all want, that actually audiences want at the end of the day. And audiences, I believe, don't necessarily mind if they're hearing a piece of music that is modern or that is historical or is an improvisation, right? I don't think they mind. What they really want is to have a good experience, and the good experience comes from being moved. So I hope that helps you understand a little bit more about me. My name's Titus, and this is Pep Organ. So if you'd like to subscribe, please hit the subscribe button and click the like, and leave a comment below, because I want to hear from you what your experience with music has been. You know, none of us come to music just because we want to learn the best technique. Everyone starts out learning music because essentially they have had an emotional reaction to it. They've felt moved by someone else's performance. And so we want to do that same thing for others and never forget that same message, okay? Music is communication. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.